I destroyed my wife in front of 20 people at a neighborhood barbecue, and honestly, I'd do it again. Let me back up, because the story of how a quiet Sunday afternoon turned into the moment I finally grew a spine is worth telling from the beginning. My wife and I had been married for 6 years, and somewhere along the way, I'd become less of a husband and more of a personal assistant who occasionally shared her bed. I cooked, I cleaned, I did laundry, I paid bills, I grocery shopped, I fixed things around the house, and in return, I got criticized for not doing these things correctly or quickly enough. The respect had evaporated so slowly that I didn't even notice it happening until it was completely gone. She'd make little comments about my cooking being bland, about me forgetting to buy her favorite coffee creamer, about how I loaded the dishwasher wrong, and I'd just apologize and try harder next time. I thought that's what good husbands did, you know? They kept the peace, they made their wives happy, they didn't rock the boat. I was the guy who said sorry even when I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for, just to end the argument faster. Looking back now, I can see how pathetic that was, but at the time, it felt normal because it had been my normal for so long. So there we were at Mike and Jennifer's place, nice couple from 3 houses down, and they'd invited about 10 couples over for burgers and beers on their back deck. The weather was perfect, that kind of late summer evening where the heat finally breaks and everything smells like charcoal and cut grass. I was actually looking forward to it because my wife had been in a decent mood all week, and I thought maybe we could just have a normal, pleasant time like regular couples do. I was talking with a couple of the guys about football when I heard laughter from the other side of the deck where my wife was standing with a group of women and a few husbands. Someone had made a joke about keeping romance alive in marriage. You know, the usual suburban small talk that sounds deep after a couple of drinks, but isn't really saying anything. I wasn't paying close attention until I heard my wife's voice cut through the conversation, loud and clear and dripping with that particular tone she used when she wanted everyone to know she was about to say something clever. She said, and I'll never forget this exact phrasing, "Maybe my husband should take a class on how to satisfy a woman. You know what I mean." The laughter that followed wasn't the good kind. It was that uncomfortable, shocked kind where people don't know if they should laugh or look away. I felt every single pair of eyes on that deck turn toward me, and the burger I'd been chewing suddenly felt like cement in my mouth. The humiliation was instant and total. Here was my wife, the person who was supposed to have my back, who was supposed to be my partner, publicly mocking me about our intimate life to our neighbors. These were people I'd see at the grocery store, people whose kids went to school with the kids on our street, people I'd have to make small talk with for years. And she'd just thrown me under the bus for a cheap laugh. I could feel my face burning, and that old familiar instinct kicked in, the one that said apologize, laugh it off, change the subject, don't make waves. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the beer, maybe it was the fact that I'd had a really long week at work, or maybe it was just that 6 years of disrespect had finally filled the tank all the way to the top. But instead of shrinking down and playing along, I felt something cold and clear settle over me. I looked directly at her, and in the same casual, conversational tone she'd used, I said, "That's funny coming from someone who's as dry as toast and dead as a wall." The deck went completely silent, like someone had hit a mute button on the entire universe. My wife's face went from smug satisfaction to pure shock in about half a second. Her mouth actually dropped open, and I wasn't done yet. I continued in that same calm voice. "But hey, you're definitely an expert at satisfaction since you spend every evening satisfying yourself by scrolling through your phone." The silence that followed was deafening. A couple of people coughed, someone's beer bottle clinked against the deck railing, and Mike looked like he desperately wanted to be anywhere else on planet Earth. My wife's face had gone from shock to bright red, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. Not sad tears, but furious, humiliated tears. She stood there for maybe 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, then turned and basically ran into Mike and Jennifer's house. I heard a door slam somewhere inside. Jennifer gave me a look that was half horrified and half impressed, then followed my wife inside. The guys around me didn't know what to do with themselves. One of them clapped me on the shoulder and muttered something about refilling his drink, and the party kind of awkwardly resumed around me at half volume. After about 10 minutes, my wife came storming back out, her face blotchy and her eyes red, and she marched straight up to me and hissed that we were leaving right now. I looked at her, took a sip of my beer, and said, "I'm not ready to leave yet." She actually stammered, like her brain couldn't process that I'd just told her no. She demanded again that we leave immediately, her voice getting shrill, and I just repeated that I was staying. She was welcome to walk home if she wanted since it was only 3 blocks. The look on her face was pure disbelief, like I'd just spoken to her in ancient Greek. She stood there for another moment, probably waiting for me to cave like I always did, but I just turned back to my conversation with Mike about the upcoming season. Eventually, she stomped off, and I heard our car start in the driveway a few minutes later. I stayed for another hour, finished my beer, had a burger, talked about nothing important with guys who were clearly dying to ask what the hell had just happened, but were too polite to bring it up. When I finally walked home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The house was dark except for the bedroom light upstairs, and I could hear her moving around up there, probably pacing and working herself up into a full rage. I made myself a sandwich, grabbed another beer from the fridge, and sat on the couch watching highlights on my phone. She eventually came downstairs like a storm system, and the fight that followed was nuclear. She called me cruel. She called me abusive. She said I'd humiliated her in front of our friends, that I'd ruined her reputation, that everyone would think she was a terrible wife. I let her rant for a while, and when she finally paused for breath, I asked her one simple question. Did she think what she'd said about me was kind? She stuttered something about it being just a joke, and I told her I'd been the punchline of her jokes for 6 years now. I'd been criticized, belittled, mocked, and dismissed in private and apparently now in public too, and I was done pretending it didn't bother me. Something shifted in me that night, something fundamental. The old version of myself, the guy who would have spent the car ride home apologizing and the next week trying to make it up to her, that guy was gone. In his place was someone who'd finally remembered that he deserved basic respect, that a marriage was supposed to be a partnership, not a hostage situation. She kept waiting for me to crack, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness like I always did, but I just went to bed. The next morning, she expected me to come crawling back with apologies and flowers and promises to do better, but instead, I made myself coffee, just 1 cup, and sat on our back porch watching the sunrise. She came out eventually, still in her pajamas, looking exhausted and confused, and asked if we were going to talk about what happened. I told her we could talk when she was ready to acknowledge what she'd done, not just what I'd done in response. She didn't like that answer. She wanted me to be sorry first, to admit I'd crossed a line, to go back to being the guy who absorbed all her crap with a smile. But that guy was dead, and I felt nothing but relief about his passing. I finished my coffee, told her I was going to the gym, and left her standing there on the porch looking like her entire world had just tilted sideways. Because it had. The real fun started on Monday morning when I made exactly 1 cup of coffee. Not a pot, not enough for 2 people, just 1 single cup in my travel mug that I took with me to work. My wife came downstairs expecting her usual morning routine, where I'd have coffee ready, breakfast made, and her lunch packed like I had been doing for the past 6 years, but instead she found an empty coffee pot and me walking out the door with my keys. She called after me asking where her coffee was, and I just said I made mine and left. I heard her yelling something as I backed out of the driveway, but I had already mentally checked out of caring what she needed from me. That evening, I stopped at the gym on my way home from work, something I hadn't done in years because I'd always rushed home to start dinner. I spent an hour there, took my time in the shower afterward, and didn't get home until almost 7. When I walked in, my wife was standing in the kitchen looking frustrated and hungry, and she asked when dinner would be ready. I told her I'd already eaten a protein bar after my workout, and I wasn't hungry, so she should make whatever she wanted. The look on her face was priceless, like I'd just told her the sky was now green. She asked if I was serious, and I said completely serious, then went upstairs to change into comfortable clothes. Over the next few days, I systematically stopped doing everything I'd been doing for her. I did my own laundry and left hers in the basket. I bought groceries for myself and cooked meals for one. I cleaned up only my own dishes and left hers in the sink. I paid the bills that were in my name and told her she needed to handle her car payment and phone bill herself. It wasn't about being petty, even though I know it looked that way. It was about establishing that I was no longer going to play the role of household servant while being treated like garbage. My wife tried everything to get me to fall back into the old pattern. First, she tried sarcasm, making comments about how nice it must be to only think about myself, but I just agreed with her that it was actually pretty nice. Then she tried picking fights, leaving her dirty dishes right in front of where I was sitting, putting her laundry basket in front of my bedroom door, but I just moved them aside and went about my day. She tried the silent treatment for about 48 hours, but that honestly just made the house more peaceful, so that backfired on her pretty spectacularly. The breaking point came about a week into my new routine when she opened her closet and realized she had no clean clothes left. She came downstairs where I was making myself breakfast and asked in this tight, controlled voice why none of her clothes were clean. I didn't even look up from my eggs when I told her that I do my laundry on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and she was welcome to use the washing machine whenever she wanted. She said she didn't know how to use it, which was probably the most honest thing she'd said to me in months, and I suggested she check YouTube for tutorials because that's how I learned to cook half the meals I'd been making for her all these years. That night, I came home from work to find the kitchen filled with smoke and my wife standing over a pot of burned pasta, actually burned, like black and stuck to the bottom. She'd been trying to make dinner for herself and had apparently forgotten that you need to stir pasta and also not cook it on high heat for 45 minutes. I opened some windows, turned off the stove, and made myself a sandwich while she stood there looking like she might cry. She asked me if I was really not going to help her, and I asked her why she thought she needed help making pasta when she'd been perfectly capable of criticizing how I made it for years. That seemed to shut down that conversation pretty quickly. The laundry situation got even better when she actually tried to wash her clothes herself and somehow turned all her white clothes pink because she threw in a red shirt without checking. She called me at work, actually interrupted my day, to ask what she did wrong, and I told her I was busy and she'd have to figure it out herself. My coworker overheard and gave me this knowing nod like he'd been exactly where I was at some point in his life. Over the next couple of weeks, my wife's frustration grew exponentially as she realized just how much I'd been doing and how little she knew about running a household. She couldn't figure out which cleaning products went where, she didn't know when bills were due, she didn't know how to meal prep or grocery shop efficiently, and she definitely didn't know how to maintain any kind of routine without someone else doing the mental labor for her. Then her mother got involved, because of course she did. I came home one evening to find my mother-in-law sitting in my living room with my wife, both of them looking at me like I was the defendant in a trial. Her mom started in immediately about how disappointed she was in me, how marriage was about partnership and sacrifice, how her daughter deserved better than this childish behavior. I let her finish her whole speech, then very calmly asked her if she'd raised her daughter to treat her husband like a maid. That stopped her mid-breath. I continued, asking if she'd taught her daughter that it was okay to publicly humiliate her spouse, to contribute nothing to the household, to show zero appreciation for everything being done for her. My mother-in-law started to sputter something about how marriage was complicated, and I agreed completely, said it was very complicated, which is why I was simplifying it by only being responsible for myself going forward. I asked her who paid the mortgage, who paid for groceries, who cooked every meal, who did every load of laundry, who cleaned every surface, who scheduled every appointment, and who got mocked for all of it. My wife was staring at the floor, and her mother had gone quiet. I told them both that I'd spent 6 years trying to be good enough, trying to anticipate every need, trying to prevent every criticism, and all it got me was a wife who thought so little of me that she'd mock our intimate life at a neighborhood barbecue. My mother-in-law didn't have much to say after that, and she left pretty quickly. But the real intervention came 2 days later when my wife's entire family showed up at our house. Her mom, her dad, her sister, even her brother who I'd met maybe 3 times, all sitting in my living room like some kind of ambush. They wanted to talk about my behavior, about how I was destroying my marriage,